This video, we will learn a lot of supply. And in the previous video, we already studied a lot of the demand. So after introducing the law of the supply, I hope you can do a little comparison between law of demand and law of supply. So before introducing the law of the supply, I want you to think about the following scenario. So let's think about you are the car manufacturing. And then you're observing that the market price starts goes up. So what is your reaction? Will you want to producing more or producing less? Yes, your decision will be producing more because the market price goes up. The more you produce and sell on the market, and then you will earn more profit. So that's pretty straightforward. So generally speaking, the law of supply is reflecting that market behaviors. So the quantity of the goods supplied in a given time period increase as its price increases, ceteris paribus, and vice versa. So compare with the law of the demand, you will find that for the law of the supply, the price and the quantity, they are going the same direction. So like we stating here, so if the price goes up, and you will see the quantity supplied will goes up. As I said, the producer will sense that the profit margin will increase. So vice versa, which means if the price goes down, which means they're shrinking the per unit profit, and then the quantity supply will also decrease. So this means the quantity and price, they are going the same direction. So if you already learned the mathematical class, you know this means the quantity demanded, quantity supplied, and the price have a direct relationship. So if we try to using a curve to indicate the relationship between quantity supplied and price, so it should be an upward slope curve. So let's using the number to learn how this supply curve should look like. So on this slides, on the left-hand side, you can see a table. So this is our supply schedule. It's very similar like our demand schedule. So the price in the first column and the second column is quantity supplied. And once again, the first column price, it is not market price. So it is just potential price and corresponding to each price and how the supply will respond. So for instance, if the price $50 and we will have 20 unit of supply on the market. If the price is 40 and we will have the producer will pay producing 15 product. And so then we are based on the supply schedule, we will creating a chart. So this chart is called a supply curve. So the vertical axis is price and the horizontal axis is quantity S. So the quantity S stands for the quantity supplied. So if you think about the previous lecture, when we look at the demand curve, so the vertical axis still be the price, but the horizontal axis actually is called QD, that is quantity demanded. So at this point, we haven't put consumer and supply in the same market. So that's why we try to distinguish quantity supply and quantity demand. So you have to keep in mind those notations. So the QS is supply. So then based on the supply schedule, and we'll find when the price is 50, and the quantity demand supply will be 20, and so corresponding to these two value, we will find the first dot on this panel, and then we will find if the price is 30, and then quantity supply will be 10. And then we find second dot, and then we connect these two dots together. So this will be our supply curve. As I mentioned, this is called the direct relationship. As price goes up and quantity supply will goes up. If the price goes down and the quantity supply will goes down. So this is the law of supply and the supply curve. So before we move on, and I want to ask you a couple questions. That is, so how we gonna achieve shifting the curve? So obviously we know that moving along the curve, that means only changing the price, and we're assuming other factor will not change. So how about other factor changes? How will that affect our supply curve? So think about this following scenario. Let's see the vertical axis indicating the price for ice cream. So I know everybody like ice cream, and the vertical horizontal axis will be the quantity supplied of the ice cream. About ice cream. So let's see. I assume you know what is base the raw material, the most important materials to make ice cream. That is milk. You're right. That is milk. So let's see the milk price goes up. So I'm not talking about the ice cream price goes up. So for milk price goes up, how will affect the supply curve. So I give you a few minutes to think about it. So if the milk price goes up, how will that affect the ice cream curve? Yes, so let's think about it. So for instance, if the producer still want to produce 10 ice creams, so which means for each ice cream, if they are selling this original price, and then each ice cream they sold, they actually will not be able to get as much profit margin as they before. So the only thing they have to do is increase the price. So for instance, here if they want to producing 10 ice cream, if the milk price goes up, so they actually has to raising their price a little bit to cover the rise the cost, material cost, maybe raising to here. So the same idea, if they want to produce 10 ice creams, and so if the milk price goes up, so they have to charging a higher price, so maybe here. So if we connect the dot together, so you will find our supply curve actually shift to the left. So shift to the left indicating the producing material or production cost increase because the milk price goes up. So this is just one example. So which means if we are not considering the product price changes, if other factor are changing, actually it will shifting our curves. So now let's look at more detail. What are the factors that will shifting our curve? So we have technology, factor costs, taxes and subsidies, expectations, other goods, and the number of sellers. So let's analyze. Before we analyze one by one, I had to mention a general rule. So for those factors, if because of the changing of those factors, we're decreasing the supply, and then what we'll see is our supply curve will shift to the left. So any factor decrease supply will causing shifting the curve to the left. So if any factor changing causing the increasing the supply, that will shift the curve. So please don't just memorizing which direction they should shifting, and please try to understand it. Increasing supply shifting to the right, decreasing supply shift to the left. And so let's think about technology. So we know if the technology get advanced, and that means the producer will be more productive. So for instance, before they only can producing 10 iPhone per day. Now since the technology get advanced, they use more machine and labor get more trained, and then they can producing 20 iPhone per day. So if that's the case, given the same time period, they can producing more. That means their supply will increase. So as we just discussed, if supply increase, so that will result in the curve shift to the right. So which means if I draw this curve, price, quantity, and then this is our original S. If the technology is advanced, increasing the productivity, what we see is our supply curve will shift to here, S prime. So shift to the right, so increasing the productivity and supply increase. So obviously, if our technology causing the production decrease, and our curve will shift to the left. And we just give you an example about the factor cost. Ice cream, if the milk price goes up, so that means it's more expensive to produce ice cream, and the producer will decrease the amount of ice cream they can produce, so that will causing decrease in supply. And what we will see is the supply curve will shift to the left, go this direction. And so the same thing happened when the OPECs have hiking the oil price. So what we see is it significantly affect the manufacturing industry in the United States. So in that scenario, the increasing energy price actually decreased the product supply in the United States, and it was shifting the production curve to the left. And also the taxes and subsidies. So for instance, back to the old time, actually the government never imposed a tax on the cigarette. So they did not impose the tax on cigarettes. But later, as the more scientists figure, and especially the physicians, realize that the cigarette actually harm human beings' life, and they start to impose the tax on the cigarettes. So imposing the tax actually implicitly, indirectly increase the production cost. So in that case, the cost increase and will decrease the supply. So the shifting the supply curve of the cigarette to the left. And the same idea for the government subsidies. And so when we are just the car industry, they're just start to exploring the hybrid car, and the government actually gives subsidy for the consumer who are able to purchasing the hybrid car. So giving the subsidy, sort of like subsidizing the factory to reducing their indirectly reducing their cost. So reducing the cost will give them more incentive to produce more products. So that's why what we see is when government give the subsidies, they actually will increase supply of the product. In that example is they are increasing the supply of the electricity hybrid car, so they will shift the supply curve to the left or to the right. So that's why what we see now is we see more and more car factory producing a hybrid car. So that has to one of the reason is because the government subsidies. And also about the expectation, and before expectation is mentioned in the factor to affect the demand. So the expectation also will affect the producer's behavior. So for instance, if producer we are expecting the the production cost will increase in the future, and what their decision going to be? Yes, they will try to produce more so that they will reduce their impact from the future cost increase. So then for current supply curve, you will see the supply will increase. So if they're expecting the factor cost will increase in the future, they will increase in the production at the current state. So that will increase in the supply, and so we will shifting the curve to the right. And also for other goods, and so if the producer realize that more and more substitute join the market, and they will realize that if they are keep producing the same amount, they may not be able to sell it. So in order to do that, they will start to decrease their production. So decrease the supply means shifting the curve to the left. And also the last factor to determine the shifting of the curve is the number of the seller. It's pretty straightforward. The more seller we have, the more product will be supplied. So then we will see the increased supply, and the curve will shift to the right. So if everybody move away, such as for instance like Detroit, they have after the government filed the bankruptcy, many business has actually run away from Detroit. So if that's the case, the number of the seller will decrease. That actually will decrease the supply. It will result in shifting the curve to the left. So those are the 6 factors you have to remember. But when we talk about how the curve will shift, please use your critical thinking ability to connect the concept with the real world, what's going to happen, and then making decision, increase or decrease in the supply, and then try to decide if the curve will shift to the right or shift to the left. So here's more detail about what I just explained. So to summarize what we learned about the law of the supply and the law of the demand, I have to once again to emphasizing the changing in quantity supplied, and the changing in supply. So changing in quantity supplied, that means when price change and how the quantity will change. So that means you only move along the curve. But if we talk about changing the supply totally, that means one of those 6 factors affect the supply's behavior. So they were totally changing the supply curve. So that means your supply curve will shift to the right or shift to the left. To give you a better understanding, I'm using the chart to indicating. So when we talk about changing the quantity supplied, we are talking about if the price for this product moving from P1 to P2, and what we see is the quantity changing from Q1 to Q2. So that is called move along the curve. So that is a changing in quantity supplied. So when we talk about changing the supply, that means one of the factor got changed. So for instance, we're increasing supply. Let's say the technology got advanced, so the producer will be able to produce more. So what we see is the supply curve will shift to the right. So this is called change in supply. So before under the price P1, we can produce Q1 amount. Now we can produce the Q3 amount. So you can see the changing the supply and the changing in quantity supplied are totally two different concepts. So when you work on the homework of this week, please pay attention on what are they asking for. Are they asking for changing in quantity supplied, or they asking for the change in the supply? So make sure you can distinguish them. And so next we will look at is we try to put out the bigger picture, because in the macroeconomic class we are looking for the whole market. But as we understand individual, and it's not a big deal to understand the whole market. So each producer is willing and able to produce a good service if he or she can make a profit. So the amount produced depends on its price. So if the price goes up, and more will produce. If the price goes down, less will be produced. So actually we found all the suppliers, they are perform very similarly. And so it will end up like the market supply will become a collective summation of all producers' individual supply. So all producers' individual supply. So it's pretty straightforward. You only need to add in each individual supply curve together. You will get a market supply curve.